This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body, which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I am your host, Dina Sabry Fivaz, and I'm a transition coach and founder of Agape Heart and Soul. In this new series, I'm delighted to introduce you to experts, coaches, and thought leaders who share their passion for being a coach versus doing coaching, for coaching beyond tools. Our aim is to challenge ourselves as coaches to reconsider some of the prevailing thinking around what good coaching looks like and to inspire ourselves to dare and truly show up within the coaching relationship. Greetings to our listeners. I am here with Aboodi Shabi. Aboodi, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you.
I do have a bit of a confession to make because I've been wanting to have this conversation with you since 2015.
God, I hope it's worth the wait.
We'll find out.
We will.
No, I'm sure it will be. But the reason why it was 2015 is because this was actually the beginning of my coaching journey. And I had to write this assignment around what is coaching. And so in my research, I came across an interview that you had given to the Association for Coaching's magazine, the Coaching Perspectives, back in 2015.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And in that, I was fascinated and really attracted by something you said, which was around your belief that coaching has a spiritual function, and now I'm quoting you, has a spiritual function in a world where loneliness has reached epidemic proportions.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, that resonated so much at this time. And I was like, I have to meet this wonderful gentleman one day. And here we are.
And here we are.
So very excited. But before we dive into the spiritual function of coaching, Aboodi, what would you like our listeners to know about you today?
I've got no idea. I could tell you about my experience as a coach. I suppose I have thought about that because you did ask me beforehand about this question. I suppose I'd just say I'm another human being trying to make sense of this crazy world. And in a sense, that connects with the broader question of spirituality and coaching. Obviously, I've got some experience in the coaching world. I've lived a life and some of those things may come up in our conversation, but really I'm just another human being trying to find meaning and purpose and connection to spirit in a world that is very challenging at the moment. And I think that's partly why, me aside, I believe that it reinforces my idea of coaching having a spiritual function that goes way beyond just the epidemic of loneliness that I might have pointed out to you 9 years ago. 9 years ago is a very long time in terms of how fast things have moved since then.
Yes, that's very true. I think one of the reasons probably why I was so attracted to that statement and still today, and also the reason for this whole series is because I started to have the feeling that maybe as a profession or an industry in coaching where I fear that there might be a risk of becoming almost mechanistic in how we go about the coaching and the relationship with our clients, just because there's such a huge focus on tools and techniques and methods and frameworks and acronyms, and they're all great, super useful. And yet the coaching relationship is so much more. The relational aspect of our work with our clients is so much more. And so I was fascinated by that aspect of a spiritual function to coaching that goes beyond. What's your experience of how the coaching profession is evolving at the moment and how it relates to your belief and the spiritual function of it today?
I think it is evolving, and I've been in the profession almost since it became an established profession. I was one of the very first members of the ICF in the UK, for instance, back in 1997, I think. I've been around from the early days of coaching, and I think then it was very much about progress and growth and goals and targets, and it was quite hubristic in its ambitions and what it could do for people. It didn't have much recognition of emotions as being a legitimate part of coaching. In fact, it almost had the opposite attitude. Didn't really seem to be very spiritual. And when I think about the historical context of that, the late 90s were quite an optimistic time in human thinking. We'd come out of the Cold War. The dot-com bubble hadn't even burst yet. There was this real sense of things could be different. We're imagining a bright new world. I think even there was a phrase, New World Order, now I think back. And I think the emergence of the coaching profession was part of that historical time. And obviously in the last 10 years, the world has become more unstable, maybe longer than that, because of course we had the financial crisis in 2008. I think some of the questions that people are bringing to coaching now are deeper and more complicated than just how do I achieve more? How do I progress, make strides towards my goals, etc. There's something else that's emerging. And as I look at the world now, particularly right now at this moment in history, where we're on the brink of the possibility of Trump winning another election, the world being plunged further into chaos and instability, questions of growth or having more stuff or getting promotion, they're not enough to address the concerns that people have of how do we live in this world, which hasn't got the promise and optimism, if you like, of the late 90s and early 2000s.
Yes, that resonates. I can recognize what you're saying in terms of, I didn't know the coaching profession then, I have to admit, but I can see that it's evolved from what you've described, that how it started. And yet I wonder, though, if there's maybe then a bit of a regression towards what it used to be in those late 90s. I don't know, maybe regression is too strong of a word, but I just notice such a strong focus on the instruments that can and should be used, or even sometimes a fear of the risk that we might take of having a client burst into tears or having an outburst of anger over an issue or a concern. And I hear that sometimes from colleagues around. I'm not sure how to contain that, so I just step away. I maybe prefer to relegate it to a therapeutic relationship as opposed to a coaching relationship.
It's interesting you say that, because I think when coaching first started, there was a lot of literature around saying therapy is for broken people, coaching is for winners who want to perform better, which was kind of slightly machismo posturing of a new profession trying to create a space for itself in the world. And now, if we look at the core competencies of coaching, there's a lot there about the coach being able to be present to strong emotions, for instance. And I think that as we mature as a profession, we need to be able to be with clients with a lot of emotional demonstration. And I think that's part of the work of the coach. And I remember something Sir John Whitmore used to say. He said, if I'm with a client and the client bursts into tears and my reaction is to walk away, as you say, or to give them a tissue and say, don't cry, then I've got to do some work on my own sadness. And I think this is part of what we as practitioners have to be able to do, particularly with the uncertainties of the world at the moment. Of course, people and the pressures that people are under, it's not just the uncertainties globally, it's also the pressure that people are on in organizations, increasing responsibilities, commitments, priorities, deadlines, etc. Emotions are much more likely to be on the surface than they were maybe 25 years ago. So I think there's a real need, both on a personal and a wider level, for us to be able to hold clients who come carrying all of the stuff that they're carrying, which will have an emotional component. And I think that's actually a really important part of coaching.
Yes. So if we go to that spiritual function, because I imagine there's a link to this, allowing that space or giving that spaciousness to whatever emerges, including those emotions. And I guess what you term as a spiritual function of coaching. So what do you understand by that term of spiritual function?
It's a really good question. And I don't think I've got an answer that stands forever. So when you reminded me, for instance, of that quote from 2015, I'd forgotten that I'd said that. And I'm not sure I would say exactly the same thing today. And I've been quoting this a lot when people ask me about this. There's a quote from Karl Marx who said, religion is the opium of the people. It provides solace and succor to people in their plight. And I think that is the function of spirituality, if you like, is to help people navigate this. There's nowhere to get to, heading towards, I don't want to be too morbid about this, but we're all navigating our mortality, and the uncertainties in the world just remind us of that. So I think spirituality is a way to help us to be with that mortality, to be with the plight, and not necessarily to fix it, but to help us to bear it and to find a way to find joy in the middle of that as well. So I think spirituality is really quite important to us. And I think we have eased spirituality out, partly because of capitalism. We have to be productive all the time. We haven't got time for rest. I still remember an American colleague saying to me, you rest when you're dead, for instance. So there's this drive towards always having more, doing more, producing more, consuming more. And really, it's empty and meaningless for most of us. So what is it that gives life meaning? It's a connection to something bigger than ourselves, which might be spirituality. If you have a faith, it might be a God, but it might be nature, it might be time with our loved ones. But what is it that gives meaning to the mechanistic life that we increasingly are living?
There's so much in what you just said, Aboodi. But you touched on the aspect of capitalism and how it's impacting us today, our mode of life, and I guess also our way of coaching and building that relationship with our clients. And I happen to just yesterday record an episode with Helena Clayton.
Oh, yeah, I know Helena.
She very briefly also touched on the aspect of capitalism. And also, she came at it from this idea of you can't be hurried and loving at the same time. So the conversation with her was around love and the role of love in a coaching relationship. And that really stuck with me, this idea of, yes, the capitalistic paradigm we live in and in which also coaching sits in. And that fast-paced, high pressure, everything hurried, quick, efficiency as one of the key objectives. We need something different. As you said, we need something that maybe slows us down, that helps us reflect, focus, rediscover meaning. You mentioned this navigate our mortality.
It's lovely that you had that conversation with Helena. And I think one of the things, in fact, I wrote a piece recently on the need for rest and pausing. And the subtext of that was that coaching is a spiritual vocation. And I shared it with a friend of mine, and he said, this is great, but you haven't mentioned the elephant in the room, which is capitalism. And I think one of the things, I've always been anti-capitalist, if I'm honest. I was, very left-wing and I was young, and I haven't really moved away from that. But I think as I get older, part of my critique of capitalism isn't a political one anymore. I still have that, but it's a spiritual one. It's that endless need to produce and consume more, as you say, the fast pace of it, that takes away the slowing down time. I'm old enough to remember in Britain, for instance, we used to have Sundays as a day when the shops pretty much weren't allowed to be open. Certainly the bigger shops were not. And Sundays were honestly a bit boring for me as a young person, but they were a day which wasn't about producing and consuming. It was a day about connecting to faith or family or being bored, but it was just not about activity. And this relentless elimination of pausing, of rest. You sleep when you're dead. We fetishize work and busyness and productivity. And I'm not saying those things aren't important. You do need those things in order for a society to function. But where is the space to pause? And if you look at it from a capitalist perspective, of course, pausing is unproductive. It's useless time, which you could be spent producing and helping the economy to grow. And I think that paradigm, it's embedded within all of us. Even though I'm an anti-capitalist on one hand, I still love my new iPhone and I still want to consume and have more and have a nice life and everything else. So I'm not outside of it. But because it's so pervasive and we don't have a socially reinforced structure that we used to have, for instance, with Sunday trading laws. When I've been in Israel, Shabbat is much more strongly enshrined in the society. So Saturdays are quieter. Some shops are open. It's not complete, but some shops are open. But for the most part, it's a quiet day and people don't work and produce. And when I've been in Islamic countries and you have the call to prayer 5 times a day, there's a reminder to stop what you're doing, which is being in the world, changing the world, etc., and just focus on Allah. And again, this isn't about having a faith, but it is about taking a breather away from what you're doing in order to think about why you're doing it, in order to think about what gives you meaning and purpose and connection. Alain de Botton, the philosopher, said that therapy is like the new priesthood. And I would say coaching is a bit like that. For in a secular world where we don't have socially enforced rest periods the way that we used to, or reminders to focus on something outside the material that we have in Islamic countries with the call to prayer, for instance, coaching is a space where people can come and leave behind the world for an hour or an hour and a half and focus on what gives us meaning, what's really important to me. It's not that their jobs aren't important and being in a society that produces goods and services isn't important, but what gives us meaning and purpose. And without that, we're effectively just growing and growing with no purpose. And if that happens in the human body, of course, we call it cancer. And I remember watching this really interesting video, which I was watching because one of my other interests in coaching is diversity and inclusion. And it was some black psychoanalysts talking about how therapy is, this was in America, and it's a little while ago, so it may be a bit out of date, but they were talking about how therapy is largely a white profession. And one of the questions being raised, apart from the diversity inclusion bit, which of course is really important, was this thing about, is therapy just producing people to fit within a capitalist society? And I think one of the questions we have to ask about coaching is coaching part of reinforcing the capitalist paradigm and helping people to produce more, have more, grow more, etc.? Or is it a space where people can take a step outside of the paradigm that we all live in and go, what's really important? And I think that if the profession is going to have lasting value, then it's going to have to focus more on helping people take a step away from their lives and reconnect to what's meaningful and important to them than just about having them produce more and achieving bigger and bigger goals.
With many different thoughts, I'll try and see if I can express some of those. So one is, I noticed that in my own coaching practice, sometimes I do feel that tension, and I never related it to the capitalistic paradigm, but I guess there is a connection to it, because there's a part of me in a session where it says, oh, this would be a moment where it would be great to maybe take a pause, slow things down, zoom in, and really take our time. And then in the back of my mind, there's the bit about, yes, but this client is paying you for 60 minutes and they're paying you whatever the rate, but they're good money. And how can you provide the most effectiveness or extract the most out of this session, this sucking as much resources as possible, offering as much value as possible? And I guess what I'm sitting with is probably it needs a reframing of what is value achieving the most in a short period of time, regardless of true impact, depth, meaning, or is it a slowing down, maybe achieving a little less, but gaining depth? That's what I'm sitting with at the moment.
I think it's a really lovely thing that you've articulated there, Dina, because of course we're coming as people who live inside that paradigm where we think we have to provide value, and value is about giving more and more. And honestly, my experience of coaching and of course of my own life is that we spend most of our lives doing that. So coaching is a moment of breath. It's a space where we can step away from that. We'll go back to being busy and cramming every minute with being productive and all the things that we do. But I think the real value we offer our clients isn't to keep them moving faster. It's that moment of pausing, like I say, that isn't given to us by our societies in the way that it used to be. Honestly, that is the crisis of our times. There are lots of crises of our times, but I think a lot of them come from the fact that we're so busy being busy and efficient and productive that we forget about what's really important to us and to the world. This is not a new thing, but there's a thing around we will be so busy consuming the planet because of productivity and capitalism that we'll destroy it and we'll think fine because it was good for the economy, rather than let's slow down. We might not grow as fast as we will, but life will be more sustainable, both for other species, for other human beings. And so I think one of the things about that, and I'm slightly extemporizing a little bit here, but we're so busy reacting to life because everything is so fast paced. And any of us who use electronic communications, which is a very old fashioned way of putting it, but, email, Snapchat, WhatsApp, etc., we're being bombarded by stuff and we've got to react now and now and now. And we forget that a lot of what's needed isn't reaction, it's response. And response can only come when we've slowed down. So there's a byproduct of this, if you will, which isn't just about spirituality being valuable for its own sake, which I believe that it is. It's also important for us to build that capacity to respond to life and to the demands made on our time, whether that's very personal decisions about making time for our loved ones rather than just being busy all the time because of all the pressures on us, or it's thinking about living more sustainably or thinking about diversity and inclusion. Whatever it is, I think it can be enhanced by having time to respond. And I think that's part of what spirituality brings us. At the end of a busy day, when I'm feeling stressed and I go for a swim, and when my body gets into the cool water, I start to slow down and I process the day, and some of my agitation or anxiety about what I should do next gets resolved, not by thinking about it and applying myself, but by just allowing my body to settle and soothe. And then when come the next morning, I can reply to that difficult email from a responsive place rather than a reactive place.
It's really interesting. And what I also find interesting is that this idea of space, distance, spaciousness keeps coming up in a lot of the talks now in this current mini-series. So there's really something to it that I'm making a mental note for myself to continue reflecting on it also further for myself and what it means for me and my practice. The other thing you made me think of was, and I won't be able to remember now the quote specifically, but it's Isaac's book around dialogue. And towards the very end of his book, and he wrote that maybe 25 years ago, and the internet was maybe 25 or even more. So internet was relatively new and all these social media and connections and so on. And he spoke about how, yes, in a digital world, we might have, and I might mix this up now, we might have connection, but not real contact. Or he might have said it the other way around, contact, but no connection. What stayed with me, though, as a metaphor was how he spoke about the digital world versus our heart, and how our heart is analog. It needs the presence. It needs, again, that space, that time to allow things to develop, to grow.
Yeah, it's a nice analogy, isn't it? Because I think the digital age brings us so much and we can consume so much. Even we just think about streaming movies and music, for instance. But it's analog is different. It's a different experience. And of course, I love being able to listen to all the music I want to, and it's all there on my phone and everything else. I'm not against it, but it's different. Again, because I'm quite old, I can remember the pleasure of getting a record out of the sleeve and putting it on the turntable and listening to the whole LP. And it was quite special because I didn't have lots of money to buy lots of records. Whereas now, for $10 a month, I can consume all the music I could imagine. So there is a difference in the quality of that experience. And I think if you like to build on that analogy, maybe spirituality, which is slower, more spacious, is a chance to connect to analog a little bit. And of course, part of the challenge of our time is the digitalization of everything, relationships and beyond relationships.
Yes, which adds that sense of pressure for speed.
Yeah. But in a sense, there's nothing new about this. I was having a conversation with a group of colleagues recently about spirituality and coaching. And we were talking about social media and that endlessness of getting likes and things like that. And this woman was from Egypt, and she said she'd read a chapter, and in the chapter, there was a quote from the Quran, and it said something like, "We spend our time in mutual rivalry of accumulation of worldly goods." And I thought, this is, I don't know, 1,500 years ago, maybe longer now. And yet it's just as relevant to today. So there's something for me about none of these problems are new and challenges are new. We've always faced these, but the digitalization of everything has really exacerbated them. And we go back to ancient wisdom of the ancient religions. I'm not even of faith myself, and I recognize that there are lots of problems with organized religion. So I'm not saying that everything about them is good, but there's something about that wisdom in there. Similarly, in Jewish philosophy, there's a notion called tikkun olam, which means fixing the world. And the idea is that God created a broken world in order for us to spend our time fixing it, devote our lives to fixing it. And in that, it also says, but we should take a day of rest when we don't do that, which is Shabbat, the day of rest. So when we look back to ancient religions and philosophies and wisdoms, we can see that even then, in a pre-digital era, in a pre-industrial era, maybe even in a pre-capitalist era, those concerns were still there. And Shabbat was developed, for instance, as a practice to help us reconnect to something more important thousands of years ago. So we've always had that need for that spaciousness, even when life was considerably slower than it was, and there was no technology and no industry and nothing was automated. People were tilling the fields or whatever.
Yes. Okay, now I find myself really curious in terms of what do you think then are implications for us as coaches? So within the coaching relationship with our clients, whether it's a one-on-one or whether it's in a group coaching setting. But so one thing I hear very strongly is give space for space. But I also wonder what else you do in your practice, or what else would be part of that spiritual function of coaching in a session. What could that look like?
So two thoughts come to mind. One is, and it came to mind earlier as well, one is that quote from Jung where he says, learn your theories and techniques as well as you can, and then be prepared to set them aside when you meet the miracle of the living soul in front of you. And I think there's something there about, just as you say, creating space for space, not creating space or filling space with techniques and powerful questions and everything else. As I develop in my work more latterly, I'm really aware that, and it goes with what you're saying about Helena Clayton and love, there's something about creating a space for love as well, and self-acceptance, which is my own journey. It's not like I love myself and fully accept myself. There's plenty of things about myself where I will torment myself because I'm not good enough at this or bad at that. But I think there's something really important. And it goes to this thing about not changing anything. This is one of the shadows of coaching is, I've got to be in self-improvement. I've got to develop myself. I've got to do this and do that and do this and study this and read this and meditate. And I'm not saying any of those things are wrong, but often they're coming from the place of there's something wrong with me. And I think part of coaching, which is what I think spirituality does, is that unconditional love that says everything is fine the way that it is. And that in itself can be quite a transformational space for our clients. And that's where we have to do our own work of self-acceptance and working with the bits of ourselves that we might not like so much, not to improve them, but to go, it's okay.
Yes. You just reminded me, I read somewhere, might have been a white paper, I can't remember, but there was something about how, as humans, we sometimes lose connection with the best part of ourselves. And one of the things that a coach could help us do in that relationship is remind us of that version, or keep a sense of, how did she call it? Like almost a sense of hope and holding someone else's version as what's possible, what's out there.
Yeah, I would slightly expand that, Dina, because I don't think it's just about being the best version of ourselves. Because again, that can be caught up in that whole self-improvement thing of how do I get to be more of the best version of myself, rather than how do I get to be me and accept me for all that I am. There's nothing to fix. If we came to life from there's nothing to fix about me, I don't have to improve myself or do this or do that. One of the ways in which that shows up for me is diversity and inclusion, for instance. And I've just recently been diagnosed as ADHD and autistic. And one of the things that I've been really reflecting on is, and I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of masking, but I've spent 63 years trying to be someone that I'm not in order to fit into a neurotypical world. And as I read about unmasking and follow some people on Instagram who are talking about it very openly, I go, this absolutely is the same thing. I am who I am and it's okay. But I've lived in a neurotypical world that says, no, you've got to sit still, or you can't do this, or you can't do that, rather than going, this is who I am. That's an ongoing journey, and I'm not saying I've mastered it by any means, but it really does speak to this thing about creating a space where we as human beings can show up and be accepted and loved, dare I say it, for who we are. And I think coaching is one of those spaces. If I'm at work and all I'm being judged on is my performance, and then I go home and I'm being judged on how good a partner or parent I am, there's very little space for me to just show up messy and whole. And I'm slightly extemporizing again, but one of the challenges for me about the coaching profession is this whole idea of coaching gurus and top 10 coaches in the world. And again, it creates this idea that somehow coaches have got it sorted out, or that we've got to be perfect. And I can't tell you the number of people that I've mentored, because I work a lot with coaches, who said, I don't really think I can be a good coach because my personal life is problematic, or I've got these issues in my life. And I think that is totally the wrong direction. The real thing is actually part of the reason I think I'm a very good coach is because I'm really in touch with how flawed I am as a human being. And I think that really goes against this idea of being the best version of myself. Sometimes I'm a complete and utter jerk and I do things and I'm like, how could you have been so thing? But that's part of being me. And if I start judging myself and go, no, I'm not good enough and I can't coach until I've sorted that out, none of us will be coaches. Even the top 10 coaches in the world won't ever be coaches, because they've all got demons and shadows and wounds like we all have.
Sometimes actually I wonder if, and it's not that one should bear our scars like medals, but it fully resonates for me that our life experiences and our own personal struggles and the scars we carry with us, like everybody else, are actually exactly the material that can and will help us become better coaches, good coaches,
Absolutely.
Because again, it comes back to that relational aspect of the relationship with my client. I'm not just a robot whose job is to sit here and ask you powerful questions and reflect everything you say back. There's so much more to it. And what I carry is part of that.
That for me is the gift that we have. And it goes back to when you asked me, what do I want listeners to know about me, or how you articulate the question? I am just another human being trying to make sense of this world. I've got plenty of baggage. I've got plenty of wounds. I've got plenty of defects and flaws. And I know, and I'm still learning because I don't always believe this, of course, but I know that is what helps me to have the compassion for my coaches who are struggling with feelings of not being good enough, or they've got wounds, or they've got this, or they've got imposter syndrome. And the more that I do my own work, the more I can help them. And there's a quote from Hasidic wisdom, and it says something like, if you want to help someone, do not think that it is enough to stand on the edge and help them from the edge. No, you've got to go deep down into the mud and filth, and then with strong arms lift them, you and yourself, up out of it, you and them out of it. And there's something for me about we do our own work so that we can help others in their plight. And again, that's something John Whitmore would say all the time. The difference between a good coach and a great coach, ongoing work on yourself. It's not coach training.
Yes. And the other thing that I heard behind what you were saying is also that the importance of the communal aspect of things. So I guess one side of capitalism is also this high focus on individualistic aspects and individualism and the individual. And we see that even more and more in things like psychology. Of course, psychology has many branches, but pop psychology focuses on what you can do for you, and resilience is all about you. And yet there's such an important aspect of the community and being together as a group, supporting each other, sharing with one another, seeing each other.
Absolutely. And when spiritual practices were enshrined in the societies we lived in, there would be communal celebrations of that. Going to church, families coming together for Friday night dinner, going to mosque. Whenever I go to an Islamic country and I see hundreds of people going to the mosque and praying, it's communal, not individual. And that's a different experience when we do things communally.
When you were talking about allowing, as opposed to being the best version or keeping the mirror of the best version our clients can be, it really resonated, actually, this aspect of allowing what is. And that's also at the heart of Arnold Beiser's The Paradox of Change. That change occurs when we allow what is to simply be and acknowledge and accept. And the other thing, as you were talking, that remind me is like when we see children. I remember with my daughter when she was still very young, she would go to daycare and I would pick her up and the teacher would, oh, she was amazing and she did this and that and she was all calm and quiet. And as soon as I pick up that child, I get the tears and the tantrums and the anger. And I was like, what? It's like two different kids. But the reality is that because she felt safe in the relationship with me, she allowed herself to show all of these emotions. And coming back to what we said earlier around emotions showing up in coaching, clients and us as human beings, we need spaces, whether now it's within the coaching relationship, within a family, within a friends, within therapy, wherever it is, but we need those spaces where we can really just be ourselves.
Yeah, and we have very few of those spaces now. We used to have more of those spaces, and we used to have communities that held us. Lots of us live alone. We live in an individualistic paradigm. We don't have communal spaces. There's an interesting book by a woman called Barbara Ehrenreich called Dancing in the Streets, and the subtitle of it is something about collective joy. And joy is increasingly individualistic and performative, because I'm on Instagram and a lot of what I see are people just showing off amazing things that they're doing. And for some reason, I don't know why, because I hardly ever fly nowadays, but one of the things that's been showing up in my Instagram feed recently is people showing off first-class cabins on various airliners. And it's individualistic, consumerist joy, performative, like, here we go, you can have this too. Rather than, no one wants to see a picture of someone hunched up in economy, for instance. But there is something about that performative, look how great my life is, rather than sharing simple pleasures with somebody else, or going to church or mosque or synagogue together, to sweat lodge. So in that vacuum, then I think coaching is one of the places. And if you like, it's almost like sneaking something through the back door, because people aren't picking up the phone or coming to a Zoom meeting to coaching saying, I've got a turbulence in my soul. They're coming and going, I need to achieve this and I need to achieve that. And that is, if you like, the entry point for the possibility of a deeper conversation. What I think we as coaches are doing is providing that space, but also showing up in a way, like you say about your daughter feeling safe enough, that they can feel safe enough to talk about the things that aren't going well for them, that are challenging for them, or that the crisis of meaning that they might be in. And I remember years ago, he's one of my first coaching clients, actually. I worked with a movie star and he was saying, I'm 25, I've got millions of pounds in the bank, I can sleep with any woman I want, and I am so miserable. And my first thought of, I wish I had that when I was 25, of course. It just pointed to something. He had everything that would be seemed as desirable, and yet there was an emptiness. And part of our conversation was just, I can talk about this with you in a way I can't talk about this with anyone else. Because if I talk about it with my friends and peers, they'll be like, are you crazy? What have you got to be unhappy about? And yet the soul, there was turbulence, there was emptiness. And that was what he came to coaching for, not to get a bigger role. But that's not what he said he came to coaching for, of course. So we've got to be able to listen beneath the goal.
I hear the listening, and then I hear then as a consequence of that, offering an invitation to our clients that if they're willing, able, wanting to dig a little deeper. So not stay at that surface and say, okay, so we'll focus on the promotion you want. We'll focus on the next big conversation you're going to be having and presentation, but allow also an invitation to go a little bit deeper to what's probably happening for this person, just not expressing it at this point in time.
And there is an art to that. I've been thinking a bit about Richard Strozzi Heckler, who does a lot of work in the somatic coaching space. And I was very lucky enough to study with him on a number of occasions. And in one of his books, he talks about how a young kid, he's an Aikido practitioner as well, by the way, Richard Heckler, and he's a black belt. So he's got some experience in that field. And someone came to him, a young man came to him and saying, I'm so angry, I want to learn how to kill somebody. And you're a martial arts expert, will you help me? And Richard Heckler said, okay, I'll help you. If you want me to help you, I will help you. I will teach you some moves, etc. But before I do that, you've got to be grounded, because if you're not grounded and you go at someone with a lethal strike, they'll topple you off your feet. So the young man goes, yeah, all right, I'll learn with you. Slightly reluctantly, but I'll learn with you. And after a few sessions with Richard Heckler, the young man says, well, I don't want to learn how to kill people. I want to learn who I am. And in the discussion of that client situation, Richard Heckler said, if I'd gone straight in and said, you shouldn't want to kill somebody, you should want to be grounded or connect to yourself, that's the turbulence I sense in your soul, he would have lost that contact with that young man. But by being able to meet him with where he was, even with a goal that, of course, is a terrible goal, in my judgment, he was able to get that trust and create the space for the young man to feel safe enough by promising him that he would give him what he wanted, but telling him that he wouldn't be able to get what he wanted unless he paid attention to being grounded. And then something deeper comes up. So I think there's something about holding that invitation really lightly and artfully, so that we're not telling our clients, when a client rings up and says, I want this great goal, and you go, what's the turbulence in your soul? That's the end of the conversation. Rather than, okay, let's have a look at that, and who are you, and what would that goal bring you, and all the exploration, or just being with that. And then underneath it, something will come. But we have to be able to contain ourselves and not jump straight into coaching the goal, but also to contain ourselves and not go straight into going, yeah, but what does your soul really long for?
You just reminded me, and probably after that we'll have to start coming to a close, I realize, which is really a shame because it's been such an amazing conversation. But just to say that you remind me of something I heard, for example, for people who are struggling with addiction. And part of at least the motivational interviewing philosophy and mindset is to first acknowledge that whatever that person's addiction, there's a perceived benefit. There's something that they feel they're getting out of it, whether it's now with the alcohol or the drugs or whatever it is. And the starting point is always, so what is this giving you right now? What is it that you're missing? Where's the gap that this is filling for you? And that's the starting point. It's not about, oh, it's terrible and it's bad for you and how much are you doing this or that. But it's really of, okay, so what is it giving you? Because clearly it's giving you something. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, and I saw an interview with Gabor Mate, who's done a lot of work on trauma and addiction, and he talks about his own addiction, and he says he was addicted to classical CDs.
Interesting.
So it's a harmless thing, isn't it? It's not drugs or, alcohol, or gambling. It's classical CDs. And you go, what's wrong with liking that? But he said, it made my life unmanageable because when I should have been doing my work, I would be in the classical CD store, for instance. It goes to this thing about, if we start look, oh, that's harmful for you, we close down the conversation. The real question with addiction, which is a different way of putting what are you getting from it, is what is the pain? And when you ask that question, it doesn't really matter what people are doing, whether addicted to heroin or classical CDs. It's what is the pain? And when we can have that conversation, well, what are you getting out of it? Then we open up to getting more about that person coming through. And my understanding of addiction, on one level at least, is it's a spiritual crisis. There's a hole inside us that we try to fill, and we keep trying to fill it with something that will never fill it, whether it's alcohol or CDs. And the people that I know who've worked in 12-step programs will say what they've really got was a spiritual solution. They might have stopped drinking, and that was, of course, a big part of it. But what helped them to stop drinking would have been a spiritual solution. And then sobriety becomes, if you like, just the first step. The real journey is the ongoing deepening of their spiritual practice.
Because a reframing took place, isn't it? There's a new understanding, there's a new story, and that makes it also more sustainable and not just a quick fix, a superficial one.
Yeah. And just to deepen that for a moment, I could see from your face that we're coming to an end, but just to deepen that for a minute, because I think it's important to bring this back in, is it is reframing and it is a new story, but it has to be a lived story. So that brings in the emotions and the body. And I think the reason I'm saying that, I think that coaching can sometimes be too quick to go to the rational. If you had a different story, how would you live? Rather than acknowledging the emotional space and the somatic space, because they're also part of the being that we are. And it's not just a rational thing of going, yeah, I could tell myself a different story and then I'll stop drinking or I'll be more happy. It's actually that we have to bring the whole being into that conversation.
Yes. That makes me think of, you mentioned Jung earlier and his wonderful quote on tools. And there's another one, I think as I was preparing for our talk today, I wrote it down. So just to share it, because I think it fits so nicely now with what you said. So that was in 1961. That was very shortly before he passed away. And he said, modern man does not understand how much his rationalism, which has destroyed his capacity to respond to ominous symbols and ideas, has put him at the mercy of this, what he calls the psychic underworld. He has freed himself from superstition, or so he believes, but in the process he has lost his spiritual values to a positively dangerous degree. His moral and spiritual tradition has disintegrated, and he's now paying the price for this breakup in worldwide disorientation and dissociation.
Lovely.
It's just so poignant, and that was 1961, and yet it feels so true today.
Like I say, none of this stuff that we're talking about is new. Obviously, this was written in 1961, the year I was born, as it happens. But also, as we were saying, some of this stuff has its roots in philosophies that are thousands of years old. So it's not new. But I think, and obviously Jung was writing a long time ago in terms of recent developments, that the thing isn't about just living a spiritual life and abandoning the world. It's the blend of both. And what we've done is to push spirituality totally out of the picture because it's unproductive, religion is superstition, etc., rather than going, we can live in the material world with all of its goodness and the things that we enjoy and love, but let's have a day or some time in the week when we can take a step away from that so that we don't just fall into that underworld of despair and loneliness or separation or being split, but we go, I can integrate it. And when I was writing the piece that I just mentioned for you, I was looking up some things about Jewish philosophy, and in ancient Jewish times, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't do this now, they would have something called Shemitah, which is every 7th year the land would lie fallow. And again, it's this idea of pausing. So we're using the land, we're growing on it and exploiting the soil and its goodness, but we give it a year to recover. And again, it's this idea that deeply enshrined within ancient philosophies was this notion of, be productive, do this, change the world, tikkun olam, fix the world, etc. But let's also take time not to be doing that. And again, I know I'm repeating myself a little bit, Dina, but this is for me where coaching comes in. It is a time not to do those things.
I can imagine, Woody, that after this conversation, some of our listeners might want to connect with you in some shape or form or read more of your work. What would be the best way to reach that?
Probably LinkedIn, honestly. That's where I've written quite a few pieces, some of which we've mentioned in this conversation. Obviously, if they want to connect with me on LinkedIn, then they're very welcome to as well. So that's the best way.
Yeah, fantastic. So as we draw to an official close, is there anything that feels still unsaid that should be said, Aboodi? Anything that you would like our listeners to leave with, to have heard?
I'm a big fan of early Bob Dylan. And in one of his songs, Visions of Johanna, which was written in 1967, I think, he sang, we sit here stranded and we're all doing our best to deny it. And that, for me, connects with the quote from me that you said at the beginning about that loneliness. And I think part of coaching is allowing people to talk about their strandedness, that we're all doing our best to deny. Again, it's creating the space for that stranded voice to be heard.
I love that. And that also makes me think that, and when they do, so as we invite them to share their strandedness, there's a part of me that wants to be in there with them. So I cannot be a bystander.
Yeah, absolutely.
In that relationship, that I cannot just be a bystander watching, describing, mirroring. There's something then that needs to happen. So we're in this together.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the thing. That's that safe space that we create, that they can calm and talk about being stranded. And we're not going to help them find a way out of the strandedness, but we are going to be a witness to them and a companion to them on that thing. And one of the things that I think happens, and we were talking about addiction earlier, from my friends in recovery, what they'll say is, we're going in lost, but there are other people to bear witness and be there with us in the journey. It's that community of recovering addicts that helps them to stay sober. And in coaching, it's, I'm a lost soul meeting another lost soul. And that identification that you're not a freak because you're lost, that it's fine to be lost. It's fine to suffer and struggle and not be your best self all the time. If I'm authentically in touch with that in myself, then I am a really good companion for someone else who's in that plight. And we as coaches have to be human beings who are there with the messiness of our own lives, the challenges we face, the political anxieties we might have, etc. Then we are not leaving our clients stranded and robotic and on the side. We're like, yes, I'm in this humanity with you too. And there's a quote from Khalil Gibran, and he says, keep me away from the wisdom which doesn't cry and act like a child. I can't remember all of it, but there's just that thing of, we coaches do ourselves and our clients a huge disservice when we say we're somehow resolved from all of the challenges of life, or we're not in there with our clients. We absolutely are, and I think we have to be if we're going to be of service to them.
Brilliant. I think this is a great place to very sadly end this conversation, Aboodi. It's been so incredibly rich and insightful.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it too. Thank you.
I'm very grateful you've taken the time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organizations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts, and live events featuring the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.